Welcome to Twisted 3's. The world can be a dangerous place, and Twisted 3's is here to show you why. Today's story is about Timothy William Dexter, better known as Timothy Treadwell, also known as Grizzly Man. Born April 29, 1957, and died October 5, 2003. Mr. Treadwell was an American bear enthusiast and environmentalist and documentary filmmaker. Treadwell spent most of his early part of each camping season in the Big Green, or what he called the Big Green, in Alaska. He called the area the Grizzly Sanctuary. This sanctuary housed some of the largest bears in the United States, called the Kodiak bear, ranging from 600 pounds to 1,500 pounds, with the largest weighing in at 2,800 pounds. The bears he encountered, some of them stood 11 to 12 foot tall. Treadwell spent much of the early part of each season camping in the Big Green. He observed the bears and sometimes would play with the bear cubs. In his book, though, he claimed that he was always careful with bears and actually developed a sense of mutual trust and respect with the animal. He habitually named the bears he encountered. Constantly, so many of the bears each summer he claimed to build a relationship with. This, in fact, was nothing more than an illusion. In contrast, Tom Smith, a research ecologist with the Alaska Science Center of the United States Geological Service, declared that Treadwell, and we quote, was breaking every part rule that there was in terms of distance to the bears, harassing wildlife, and interfering with natural process. Right off the bat, his personal mission was at odds with the Park Service. He had been warned repeatedly to stay away from the bears. He had been ticketed for not moving his camp, so to be compliant with park rules. He was warned repeatedly and ignored all the warnings, claiming that somehow he was protecting the bears and stopping what he called poaching. And if it wasn't for him, in his mind, poachers would kill the bears. But in reality, there was no issue with poachers. Despite all the warnings, in September of 2003, during the later part of each summer, he would move his camp to an area especially thick with brush he called the Grizzly Maze. Here the chances of crossing paths with wild bears was much higher. Since the location interacted with bears' trails, Treadwell recorded almost 100 hours of footage dealing with the grizzly bears and produced a large collection of still photographs. One such bear he recorded stood 11 foot tall, and Treadwell got extremely close to that bear in one video. By 2001, Treadwell became sufficiently notable to receive extensive media attention both on television and environmental circles, and he made frequent public appearances as an environmental activist. He traveled throughout the United States to educate school children about bears and appeared on the Discovery Channel, The Late Show with David Letterman, Dateline NBC, to discuss his experiences, while no one took into account that what he was actually doing was not only dangerous to him, but dangerous to the bears. He also went on to co-write Among Grizzlies, Living with Wild Bears in Alaska with Jewel Pavelak. And in his book, it described Treadwell's adventures on the Alaska Peninsula. Treadwell and Pavelak founded Grizzly People, an organization devoted to protecting bears and preserving their wildlife habitat. Charlie Russell, who studied bears, raised them, and lived with them in Russia, for decades worked with Treadwell Russell advised Treadwell to carry pepper spray and use electric fences when he was camping in the Grizzly Maze or on the island. Charlie refrained from comment on Treadwell after he was killed. But after Grizzly Man was released, the movie that depicted Treadwell's adventures, he wrote a lengthy critique of Treadwell's failures to follow basic safety precautions. In spite of his criticism of Treadwell, Russell praised him for his devotion to bears and his ability to remain alive for so long. He defended him against people who criticized his work, writing, "If Timothy had spent those 13 years killing bears and guiding others to do the same, eventually being killed by one, he would have been remembered as an Alaskan with great admiration." Russell was critical of Grizzly Man, saying it was unfair to Treadwell, and if Pavlak really was a protector of bears, she would have, or should have, looked for a filmmaker who would have been sympathetic toward them. In October 2003, Timothy Treadwell and his girlfriend, Amie Huguenard, visited Kodiak Island. In Grizzly Man, Werner Herzog stated that according to Treadwell's diaries, Huguenard feared bears and felt very uncomfortable in their presence. Her final journal entry indicated that she wanted to be away from the island. Treadwell and Huguenard were to leave the park at their usual time of the year and had actually returned to the Kodiak on September 26 to store their gear for the season and catch a connecting flight to their home in California. After an argument with the airline ticketer over the price of alternative flights, Treadwell and Huguenard made the decision to return to their campsite on September 29th for an additional week. Treadwell was also wanted to locate a favorite female bear that he was also concerned about. He said he hated modern civilization and felt better in nature with the bears than he did in big cities around humans. The bears that he had been used to during the summer had already gone into hibernation, and bears that Treadwell did not know from other parts of the park were moving into the area. Some of the last footage taken by Treadwell, hours before his death, included video of a bear diving into the river repeatedly for a piece of dead salmon. Treadwell mentioned in his footage that he did not feel entirely comfortable around that particular bear. In Grizzly Man, Herzog speculated on whether Treadwell filmed the very bear that killed him. Around noon on Sunday, October 5th, 2003, Treadwell spoke with an associate in Malibu, California by satellite phone. Treadwell mentioned no problems with any bears. The next day, October 6th, Willie Fulton, a Kodiak air taxi pilot, arrived at Treadwell and Huguenard's campsite to pick them up, but found the area abandoned, except for a bear, and contacted the local park rangers. The distance from the camp, Huguenard's partial remains were found next to the torn and collapsed tent. Partially buried in a mound of twigs and dirt, a large male bear, tagged Bear 141, protecting the campsite, was killed by park rangers during their attempt to retrieve the bodies. A second assailant bear was also killed a short time later when it charged the park rangers. In history of the national park, this was the first known incident of a person being killed by a bear. A video camera recovered at the site proved to have been operating during the attack, but police said that the 6 minutes of tape contained only voices and cries as a brown bear mauled Treadwell to death. The tape began with Treadwell yelling that he is being attacked. "Come out here. I am being killed out here," he screamed. That the tape contained only sound led troopers to believe that the attack might have happened while the camera was stuffed in a duffel bag or during a dark night. In Grizzly Man, filmmakers Herzog claims that the lens cap of the camera was left on, suggesting that Treadwell and Huguenard was in the process of setting up another video sequence when the attack happened. The camera had been turned on just before the attack, presumably by sound activation, but the camera recorded only 6 minutes of audio before running out of tape. This, however, was enough time to record the bear's initial attack, presumably by sound activation, but the camera recorded only 6 minutes of audio before running out of tape. This, however, was enough time for the bear's initial attack on Treadwell and his agonized screams. Its retreat after Huguenard tells Treadwell to play dead, and when she attacked it, and it returned to carry Treadwell off into the forest. You can hear Treadwell screaming to get the frying pan. The attack had little effect on the bear. Ultimately, Treadwell and Huguenard were both partially eaten.